Think for a moment in an ancient land, whose name refers to a sense of majesty and mystery. Uz. It is there that lived a man whose reputation echoed beyond its borders. In that scenario, without technology, without social networks or big cities, the word spread through the caravans that crossed commercial routes. More than his fortune, many admired the zeal with which he approached God. At each end of his children's parties, Joe ordered them to be sanctified and offered holocausts for each one, for he feared that in the heat of joy they would sin or curse God within them. Joe is the greatest of all the Orientals. Until then, Joe lived surrounded by comfort, with a large family gathered at full tables, and a visible peace hovered over his house. His name was Joe, and everyone knew him as someone integral, straight, and devout to God. Joe, shaken, remained silent, but before even assimilating the loss, another servant ran in to announce that divine fire had come down from heaven and consumed the sheep and more servants. The heat of that arid ground witnessed tears that Joe held for himself. Joe then rose, tore his cloak in a sign of great pain, raised his head, and, throwing himself to the ground, bowed down in silent worship. With a heavy voice, he confessed, "I have come out of my mother's womb." He had thousands of sheep, thousands of camels, hundreds of oxen and donkeys, and many servants helped him on a daily basis. Joe felt the weight of the tears in every word heard, and finally, the fourth messenger arrived, suffocating, announcing that a great tornado, coming from the desert, would knock down the house where his sons and daughters gathered at the time of the feast. When his wife, taken by despair, looked at him and said, "Do you still maintain your integrity? Why did you not curse God and die?" Joe replied firmly, "You speak like a fool. We receive God's good, and we would not receive evil." So he continued to sustain his integrity, refusing to attribute to God's wrath each arrow of pain, understanding that only the Most High could determine the extent and purpose of his afflictions. Despite the circumstances, Joe's thirst for justice remained alive, but he refused to turn suffering into blasphemy. This divine permission was not ignored, but because the Creator, in his wisdom, knew the true character of Joe did not curse her, but blessed God, even when he felt the void clinging to his being, and knew that even the deepest pain would not shake the genuine faith of that faithful servant. This time, the Lord allowed Satan to touch Joe's flesh, but without taking her life. Thus, he was already overcome by evil ulcers that covered his body, from the soles of his feet to the top of his head, making his comfort a distant past. This attitude revealed a vigilant heart, someone who understood that blessings did not mean omission of holiness. One day, however, something happened that transcended human understanding. His confidence was ceased there in a sovereign God, worthy of praise in all circumstances. The sighs barely ceased. As for the loss of children and possessions, and a new investment of pain prevailed. In heaven, a single scene, and at the same time, powerful, unfolded. The children of God appeared before the Most High. Among them arose Satan, the accuser. He looked at Joe, the respected figure on earth, and sentenced her. Did Joe fear God for no reason? Did you not surround him with protection, ridding him of evils and filling his house with blessings? We will take these blessings and see if his fidelity will resist. The accusation soared in the heavenly air. God, in his sovereignty, allowed Satan to have access to Joe's heritage and family, but left his person intact. Meanwhile, on earth, Joe lived his daily life. He may not even suspect the celestial treatises, for his heart was turned to God and the prosperity of his family. The routine followed normally, until one day messengers began to arrive at his tent, bringing devastating news. The first reported that the Sabaeans had attacked and taken the whole herd of oxen and donkeys, killing the servants with a sword. There was still not enough time for the ashes to settle, and a third messenger arose, saying that camels had been surrounded by Chaldeans and their slain servants mercilessly. The collapse of the pillars buried them all, and none survived. I will become naked. The Lord gave, the Lord took. Blessed be the name of the Lord. These few words echoed like a declaration of faith that transcended human understanding. At that moment, the earth dried up in sadness, while Joe demonstrated that his fidelity did not depend on possessions or children around him. But once in heaven, Satan appeared before God and declared, if we take away the protection of his health, he will certainly blaspheme. In an act of despair, he arranged a ceramic bowl and, sitting on ashes, he scraped the wounds that reminded each scratch the weight of suffering. The news of Joe's condition quickly spread through the neighboring lands, and 3 friends, Eliphaz the Manith, Bildad Sutha, and Zophar Namathol, heard about the disaster that fell on that just man. Moved by compassion and old friendship, they shared the path in silence, reflecting on what they could say about so much suffering. When they arrived, they saw him sitting in ashes, without words, and each one in mourning sat on the floor next to him. They did not even dare to open their mouths, because they realized that the pain was too deep to be consoled with mere words. For 7 days and 7 nights they remained silent, sharing the weight of a pain that exceeded easy explanations. Eliphaz, with a soft voice and a logic that seemed unbreakable, suggested that all suffering derives from some guilt hidden in the intimate, and longed for a mediator between him and God, someone who would explain directly the reason for his wounds. In the midst of the words, the outburst echoed, "Ah, who would give me an expiatory body? Who would take his hand over me? The human intercessor between me and the Almighty, for it changes his anger," until one day, in the midst of a whirlwind of questions, a 4th character entered the scene. A young man who heard the words of Joe and his 3 friends and was angry, "So that it does not consume me, it would hurt me little." In the middle lines, Joe revealed a universal truth to pain. From the middle of a whirlwind, a powerful and majestic voice arose, like a thunderbolt that shook the heavens to the earth. "Say, if you have intelligence, about whom your foundation began, or who spread over it the cornerstone when the stars of the morning together happily sang, and all the children of God bragged of pleasure. Little by little, the divine discourse unfolded in descriptions of creation that highlighted the smallness of the human being before the mountains, the unknown seas, and the creatures that wander through the secrets of the abyss. God asked if Joe could catch the lion in his cage, if he could feed the crow or frighten the roar of Leviathan. Each question sounded like a mirror in front of Joe, reflecting how limited human understanding was to encompass the divine purposes in the intricate web of creation. God began with rhetorical questions that at first glance seemed incoherent. When he misunderstood, he could lead the human heart to doubt himself, to wonder if he really serves God, or if his fidelity was only the result of favorable circumstances. He would then take his hand away, and there would be a slight shadow for me before his face turned against me again. Can someone instructed have more understanding than God? Do not you think that your suffering will never reach you? However, during all that debate of friends, a fundamental question emerged. Do men, when judging God's plans, have a superior understanding? The accusations repeated an old concept that the righteous would never suffer, that the divine blessing was the guarantee of prosperity and health, while the pain was the unequivocal sign of guilt. His message, however, continued to reinforce the thesis that God uses suffering to correct and instruct man, reviving fear of the Lord. Even so, Joe did not see clarity in words and continued to cry, "My pain is incurable, but it would be chosen, if any, for the long life of anguish. I got to the end before I got to the taste of the target. Remind me how much I have to live. Ponder now. If the calamity does not come from the Lord and from God does not proceed the fear. To his words, Joe replied, claiming his innocence, questioning why, even without sin, he was afflicted. It was only after this silent morning that Joe, in his anguish, opened his mouth to curse the day of his birth, wishing that that moment had never existed. Soon the dialogue matured and took the shape of a theological debate. The conversation went on like this. Eliphaz accused, Joe defended himself. Eliphaz again insisted on the need for repentance. Then Bildad entered the discussion, dragging similar concepts. Does God twist his judgment? Is not your iniquity great? Eliphaz and Joe, feeling increasingly misunderstood, multiplied their complaints, asking ears for their cause and lamenting the divine indifference. The voices rose in a heated tone of debate, full of verses that tried to fit their pain in conventional formulas of retribution. If you are pure, he will be attentive to you and, looking at you with pleasure, restore the abode of your justice. Joe, in turn, denied having made any mistake that justified such persecution, and in the end, when Zophar, the most incisive, entered the debate, accused Joe of talking too much and hiding deep sins, suggesting an immediate confession. Joe, lacerated in his heart, felt the weight of the false accusation. It was the expression of one who felt abandoned, without understanding, but who still held hope that God had heard his cry. Joe's conviction challenged this reasoning. He knew his integrity. He remembered how many times he faithfully turned to God. He felt, however, that God was silent before his complaints, and the anguish of not receiving an answer became more and more unbearable. He considered that someone's age does not guarantee wisdom, and so he decided to take the floor. My days are faster than a runner. Like a warrior, I am cut by the day of evil. Finally, God, who until then remained silent, decided to break the veil and speak directly to Joe. Who is this who covers the counsel with words without understanding? Where were you when I founded the earth? While God spoke, Joe remained silent, absorbing each word as if the wind had taken his ego away, leaving him face to face with the creative majesty. The feeling that permeated his heart was of reverential bewilderment and fear. He understood that his suffering, even being hard, was inserted into a much greater context, engraved in the very core of divine wisdom. It was at this moment that the needs of logical explanation gave way to the recognition that there were many hidden values in the heart of God that exceeded any human reasoning. Joe then bowed before the one who knows everything, confessing that he spoke of what he did not understand, that he pronounced words without knowledge. God, turning to Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, declared that his words did not reflect the truth about the divine character. The man, before taken by pain and by the demand for justice, experienced a deep turn. His complaints turned into silent worship. After this divine dialogue, something extraordinary happened. He raised his hands to the Lord and pleaded for mercy on those lives that had been entangled in rigid concepts of divine retribution. He died satisfied with his life, leaving a lasting legacy of faith that transcended the limits of his land and his time. When we reflect on this trajectory, some truths emerge like lit lamps in the darkness of pain. If God sustains the life of each bird and knows the ways of Leviathan, the more he knows and leads the life of his children. This perception deconstructs the simplistic belief that the righteous never suffers. And when Joe prayed for their friends, the Lord heard him, forgave the mistakes of the three, and ceased the calamity that hovered over them. Job, described from the beginning as whole, suffered for reasons that escape human knowledge. For the practical life of each Christian, Job's story echoes as an invitation to perseverance in faith. In the midst of all this, Joe's voice echoes Romans 8:28. Even if we can't always see how there is a benevolent purpose behind the trials, it would still be better to sit with him in silence, as Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar did in the first 7 days. May the words of comfort not be mere repetitions of human assumptions, but authentic expressions of compassion, and above all that we seek. Lord, in prayer, interceding for those who suffer, and asking that He reveal at the right time the meaning of each tear. Even if you do not understand, I will trust. Even if everything is taken away, I will praise. Strengthen us in faith, and help us to persevere, always remembering, even in the darkest nights, the Sun of Justice must break the horizon. Amen. And at the end of each trial, may the restoration of the Lord involve us with multiplied grace, showing that behind each sincere tear there is a divine purpose that infuses redemption, character, and unwavering hope. And if these words touched your heart, share here in the comments an amen, and tell how God has operated in your trials. The Lord, when shaking the glass, seeks to extract impurities from us, refine our confidence, and shape our character like Christ. Even if He kills me, I will wait for Him. This statement is not an appeal to seek suffering for free, but a demonstration of faith that finds shelter in the character of God above adverse circumstances, and then we will be humiliated before the divine majesty, recognizing that He leads the universe with wisdom that we could never encompass. When Job prostrated himself in the dust, he confessed that he spoke of what he did not understand, but also experienced forgiveness and the restoration of God, who, in His infinite mercy, returned him twice all that he had lost. This restoration was not given only to prove that God is just, but to reveal that even in the ashes of pain, a garden of hope can arise. Second, the narrative teaches that the sovereignty of God extends to all areas of creation. Through God's resounding words, through the whirlwind, John learned that there were huge gaps between human knowledge and divine wisdom. Thus, we are also invited to silence our insecure certainties, an open space for pure confidence that sustains the soul when the teeth close in chaos. In addition, we learned that true compassion is not measured only in words, but in present. Fidelity to God does not depend on clear answers, but on a heart that recognizes that He always acts for our eternal good. We remain then firm, crying out like Joe in our darkest moments. Joe's friends, even if they did not understand the depth of the divine mystery, were able to comfort him in silence, sitting by his side in the ashes. It had been Joe, and not them, who spoke correctly. For this reason, he sent them to offer them sacrifices and ordered Joe to intercede for the friends. The story would almost culminate in tragedy for those 3 men who judged with presumption. Joe, when he cried for forgiveness of the friends who accused him, experienced the restorative intervention of God. How many times we, in our communities, let the lack of forgiveness and pride in judging prevent the restorative action of the Lord. But Joe, even shaken, accepted the role of intercessor. For Joe, the reward for perseverance and unwavering faith was as surprising as his approval had been painful. God doubled everything he had. The fields before full of sheep gained 14,000 heads. The number of camels rose to 6,000. The number of oxen became 1,000. And the flock of donkeys reached 1,000 equally. In addition to the material good, his lineage was restored. He had 7 more sons and 3 daughters. Their beauty was such that not even the daughters of Mesopotamia were comparable. His days of anguish ceased, and Joe lived 140 years, contemplating up to 3 generations of his descendants. First, we discover that suffering is not necessarily a sign of punishment for a specific guilt. Oceans, constellations, wild animals, and even the world of the dead The third lesson calls each believer to give up the pride of thinking that he fully understands the divine design. Another truth that is transparent is the value of intercession and forgiveness. Joe shows us that praying for others, even for those who offended us, is a powerful path of reconciliation. There are moments when nothing said relieves pain. In these moments, the gesture of simply being together already translates the love that heals. Even when there are no immediate answers, we live in times of frightening medical diagnoses, financial crises, family conflicts, political uncertainties. Trusting God implies recognizing that He does good to those who love Him. So, when someone close goes through a crisis, let's not be quick to attribute the cause to hidden sin or recite simplistic formulas of retribution. For, as Joe, one day we will see with our eyes those who act without understanding. And if today you find yourself immersed in the bitter dust of disappointment, remember Joe. If you have pleasure in my heart, listen to me, answer me, even if the storms rush around, that we may echo your challenging faith. Your life can be the echo of Joe's testimony, showing that in the depths of despair, the seed of an even more authentic may. God bless us.